excerpt set if you want to find out more information or what happened, what was maybe skipped. Those are the pages you want to read over. Within this guided reading, we're going to be looking at the following areas. First of all, Anne reflects on a saying that's actually in German. We're not going to touch base on that just because I'm not fluent in German, but it has to do with being on top of the world or in the depths of despair. And I want us to take a minute to think about that and the experiences that we've faced in our own lives where you maybe have felt one of these feelings, where in that moment you feel like nothing can be better. You're on top of the world, whether you just won something or just completed something you've been waiting for so long. Just that feeling of exhilaration. And when those moments happen, you know, it's just something you can't, nothing can bring you down, right? And then we also have those moments where we just feel like there's no way out, right? It's just something really horrible happened and you're trying to find that light at the end of the tunnel. And a lot of the time, unfortunately, in Annex, the morale seems to kind of be on the side of the depths of despair. But Anne does try and reflect a little bit about the other half of that, being on top of the world. We're going to be looking at Anne as she reflects on some of the people she misses and wonders about them. It actually ties into our last section. She talks about Lise, her friend Lise, and wondering where she's at. So she does come back in this section. But that does say a lot and speak a lot to Anne's character. And then Anne's self-reflection and maturation. She kind of just does a self-analysis, realizing that she's maturing and growing and progressing through her teen years as a young lady would do. So this section is, you know, just her sharing her feelings with her diary. You know, there's times in a girl's life where it seems like there's no one to share that information with, and especially in Anne's situation where she doesn't even feel like she has a friend. In the Annex, her diary is a great outlet for that. And that leads me to kind of the same thing here, hormones, questions, and boys. Oh my. This is the section where Anne kind of gets a little bit emotional because of what's going on with her and her changing and everything, and she starts to kind of, it just reminds me of going through my adolescence and just kind of the boy crazy or thoughts running through your head, and so she shares just a little bit of that. And the effects of the Holocaust on the morale of the housemates now. We know this is an ongoing thing. And by now we are like right in the middle of the diary, so you should know Anne's style is kind of to go back and forth. She seems to be focused in the now at times and reflects on things that have bothered her just in that moment. And then a lot of the time she's reflecting on the past as well, things that have happened in the past, people that have come and gone into her life. So it's a little bit of back and forth, and she's just continuing that in this section here. Alrighty, so what I'm going to do is read along with you, but what you can notice is that your vocabulary words that might be new or unfamiliar are in red here. Alright, so we got wretched. Atmosphere is a vocabulary word because that's going to come up in one of your checkpoints. So I know some of you are familiar with what the word atmosphere is, but I'm going to touch base on that. And I apologize, go back to wretched. And then discontented and rollicking. And instead of breaking it down and previewing what it means before we read, we're kind of going to stop and go through context clues, because it really should be a process of you slowing down and seeing, what does that actually mean? Can I figure it out from the context of the words that are around that vocabulary word? Okay. All right, so we're going to start off and just listen, and I might pause. I kind of try and do the active reading model, so I might pause and think about things as I read. So Wednesday, 22nd of December, 1943. Dear Kitty, a bad attack of flu has prevented me from writing to you until today. It's wretched to be ill here. It's wretched to be ill here. Well, I can't imagine it's a good thing to be ill, so it might be a very bad thing, wretched. When I wanted to cough, 1, 2, 3, I crawled under the blankets and tried to stifle the noise. Usually the only result was that the tickle wouldn't go away at all, and milk and honey, sugar, or lozenges had to be brought into operation. It makes me dizzy to think of all the cures that were tried on me. Sweating, compresses, wet cloths on my chest, hot drinks, gargling, throat painting, lying still, cushions for extra warmth, hot water bottles, lemon squashes, and in addition, the thermometer every 2 hours. Sounds like torture, right? So just think and reflect, how often do we take for granted that we can do things, cough, sneeze, even burp aloud, where Anne has to, be forced to stifle those coughs out of fear of being heard. And, her family's attempts to make that flu go away so that they can be quiet and remain quiet. Just a small passage there, but I think it's so insightful to see what she has to deal with. All right, now we are on to Friday, 24th of December, 1943. Dear Kitty, I've previously written about how much we are affected by atmospheres here, and I think that in my own case, this trouble is getting much worse lately. Now, by now you should know the atmosphere, she's not referring to necessarily the outside atmosphere, like barometric pressure or anything. The atmosphere would be anything that is surrounding her at that moment. So, of course, whatever's happening there is affecting all of the others as well as her. But here we go. It's getting much worse lately. So this is where she pulls back in her motif of nature. She feels that connection that we talked about in the last section. When someone comes in from outside with the wind in their clothes and the cold on their faces, then I could bury my head in the blankets to stop myself thinking, when will we be granted the privilege of smelling fresh air? And because I must not bury my head in the blankets, but the reverse, I must keep my head high and be brave, the thoughts will come not once, but countless times. Believe me, if you have been shut up for a year and a half, it can get too much for you some days. In spite of all justice and thankfulness, you can't crush your feelings. Cycling, dancing, whistling, looking out into the world, feeling young, to know that I'm free. That's what I long for. Still, I mustn't show it, because sometimes I think if all 8 of us began to pity ourselves or run about with discontented faces, where would it lead us? So discontented faces sounds like, if I can connect that with the word pity, so I'm down here. If we all 8 of us begin to pity ourselves or run about with discontented faces, and if I break that down, I know content, right in the middle there, is pretty happy with everything. So discontented would be the opposite, not happy or pleased or pleasant faces. Where would it lead us? I sometimes ask myself, would anyone, either Jew or non-Jew, understand this about me, that I am simply a young girl badly in need of some rollicking fun? Rollicking, it's kind of an old-fashioned term, but some rollicking fun. So she's a young girl, and what is she talking about? She's kind of just saying she feels pent up inside. She can't go do things like cycling, dancing, whistling, looking out in the world, feeling young. So rollicking fun just sounds like a good old time. I don't know, and I couldn't talk about it to anyone, because then I know I should cry. Crying can bring such relief. So Anne just having a hard time dealing with not being able to be outside, to be young, to be free. It's things we just take for granted. So this, slide, both of these passages are really about what we take for granted, and reflecting on how Anne was unable to do that. And I know this has been brought up before about her wanting to be outside and the nature motif, but the longer that they're in there, the harder it gets. And as much as she is trying to be an optimist, because look, she says, I need to do the reverse. I've got to keep my head high and be brave. And by doing that, it actually, she's so mature in her reflection, she says it actually comes more often because I'm trying to force it out. Whereas if I were just miserable and held my head high or low, didn't hold my head, she would end up feeling, that feeling all through. So it's a tough one, but I still admire her optimism here in trying to realize if all 8 of us did this, where would we be? Now, I'm going to look at atmosphere and try and connect it to our own lives. And this is going to be your checkpoint. It says number 5 here. I know we're just getting started, but I am putting that at the end because we have to look at the atmosphere as a whole throughout all the passages. So this is like the key word for this lesson is atmosphere, and we're looking at how that is overall in the annex. And you'll have a few word choices to describe that annex, and you're going to pick what is the best word to describe the atmosphere. So just be thinking of that as an overall arching question, and when we get towards the end, we can go back and think about that. But when you're talking atmosphere, just think about, I said at the beginning when I introduced the concepts for today, but think about different situations where you have felt that you're in an atmosphere and how it has affected you. I just have some images here that, this would represent maybe a dance or party of some sort. And what kind of atmosphere, how would you describe that when you walked in? And then, comparing that to a different atmosphere, maybe a game of some sort. How does that feel when you walk in there, when you're in the crowd or in the game even, if you're playing, whether you're a spectator or an athlete. A funeral, what's the atmosphere there? Okay, some words that you might describe some of these things, I would say maybe somber, quiet, and then the opposite for some of the happier things, joyous, fun, noisy. The atmosphere was popping, I don't know, happening. And this is just a show or a concert. So these three, I'd say you have maybe some similar terms to describe the atmosphere versus something like a funeral. But think about the annex and what is going on and how they do try to lift each other's spirits a little bit, and they conversate some of their outlets as being in hiding, the conversations that they have are what we're going to look at. So we'll determine the atmosphere at the end. Okay, let's go into December 29th here. And what I'm going to do before we actually read is look at this checkpoint question. What is Anne feeling when she thinks about her friend Lise? And she had brought her up earlier in the last section, so we're going to see what she says here. I did emphasize a few words, no vocabulary, but I emphasize a few words that are repeated and deal with her feelings to help you understand maybe what she is feeling when we get to the answer. All right, Wednesday, 29th December 1943. Dear Kitty, I was very unhappy again last evening. Granny and Lise came into my mind. Granny, oh darling Granny, how little we understood of what she suffered or how sweet she was. And Lise, is she still alive? What is she doing? Oh God, protect her and bring her back to us. Lise, I see in you all the time what my lot might have been. I keep seeing myself in your place. Why then should I often be unhappy over what happens here? Shouldn't I always be glad, contented, and happy, except when I think about her and her companions in distress? I am selfish and cowardly. Why do I always dream and think of the most terrible things? My fear makes me want to scream out loud sometimes, but still, in spite of everything, I have not enough faith in God. He has given me so much, which I certainly do not deserve, and I still do so much that is wrong every day. If you think of your fellow creatures, then you only want to cry. You could really cry the whole day. The only thing to do is pray that God will perform a miracle and save some of them, and I hope that I am doing that enough. Wow. So what she's actually feeling here with the repetition of very unhappy and selfish and cowardly, and she's putting it all together in the fact that, I could be in a different place. If she's wondering where her friend is, if she's still alive, what is she doing? It could have been me out there. We are somewhat protected. Shouldn't I be happy right now? So that overall feeling is down here in the green box is guilt. She feels guilty from us. Being unhappy, selfish, and cowardly is actually kind of a culmination of guilt. Guilt that she is safe while her friend is possibly or most likely not. And this is something that people can feel, not just in a situation like this, but in any other situation. I don't know how many of you, might play a sport or do an activity that had or required tryouts, if you've ever done that. There might be a point, where you have friends that are trying out with you. It's kind of that same feeling of guilt that, if you make the team or they make the team, that they should be really happy for themselves, or you should be really happy for yourself and proud, but you have this little feeling of guilt. And that's really what Anne is feeling right now, that a little bit of selfishness, being safe where other people are not. That's a harsh reality. And it does, like I said, it happens outside of just where we've got this lifestyle for Anne. That happens in everyday life as well. Or let's say maybe you weren't involved, but in the future, okay, maybe we're talking about a job. So I'm going to give you another example. Your employer calls you in, or your boss calls you in and promotes you, gives you a raise, but someone that you've become really good friends with, you started at the same time, does not get the same offer, and you have a discussion about it, there may be a little sense of guilt there for you, feeling, you should be happy about it, but you also have that slight guilt because, they didn't get what you did. So that feeling happens more often than you would think. Okay. Sunday, January 2nd. This is where Anne comes up with the reality that she is maturing and growing, and she actually comes to the realization that maybe she did not see things from someone else's perspective. So you might see the image down here on the board. We're actually going to be talking about the theme that we discussed in To Kill a Mockingbird if you were here for that. So the checkpoint here is going to look at a quote from this passage. It's asking, what theme does Anne understand when she reflects in this quote? And I'll read the quote in the passage, in the journal entry in just a moment here. But if you are making the connections before I even read, you should understand what the theme is. It was pretty much the permanent theme of To Kill a Mockingbird. Sunday, 2nd of January, 1944. Dear Kitty, the morning when I had nothing to do, I turned over some of the pages of my diary, and several times I came across letters dealing with the subject to Mommy in such a hot-headed way that I was quite shocked and asked myself, Anne, is it really you who mentioned hate? Oh, Anne, how could you? I remained sitting with the open page in my hand and thought about it and how it came about that I should have been so brimful of rage and really so filled with such a thing as hate. So brimful, a vocabulary word there, I would say, full to the brim, right? So full of rage, and she's saying filled with such things as hate, so I could use those context clues to understand what rage, hate, and being full of as brimful. So filled with such a thing as hate that I had to confide it all in you. And Anna's talking to her diary right here, okay, as if it's her friend, So to confide all of this information of how she was feeling, meaning she can trust in sharing it with the diary, to confide in. I've been trying to understand the Anne of a year ago. Sorry, I'm down here if you haven't been following. And to excuse her because my conscience isn't clear as long as I leave you with these accusations, without being able to explain on looking back how it happened. Wow. If you're not picking up, Anne is completely maturing right there. She's saying, I've confided in you, so I've shared my thoughts with you, trusting that everything would stay here. However, my conscience is not clear as I look back and say, wow, Anne, you just were not very nice saying all those hateful words about your mother. So she's actually realizing this within the time that she's been in the annex that she needs to look at a different perspective here. So here she's revealing a little bit about how she feels. I suffer now, and I suffered then, from moods which kept my head underwater, so to speak, and only allowed me to see things subjectively without enabling me to consider quietly the words of the other side, and to answer them as the words of one whom I, with my hot-headed temperament, had offended or made unhappy. So look at that bold area, and this is where our theme comes into play. I only saw and let my own feelings out. I was not able to consider quietly the words of the other side, how she phrases that. Meaning, just like the theme from To Kill a Mockingbird, taking a walk in someone else's shoes, making sure you understand where they're coming from before placing judgment. So Anne, having that temperament and reflecting on her mom and the feelings that she had toward her at the moment, she's now saying, wait a minute, maybe there is more to that. Okay? So we're going to look a little bit further into her self-reflection here on the next slide. I hid myself within myself. I only considered myself and quietly wrote down all my joys, sorrows, and contempt in my diary. This diary is of great value to me because it has become a book of memoirs in many places, but on a good many pages I could certainly put past and done with. And we have that vocabulary word contempt in there, so I'm going to go back and I'm looking at my context clues. I only considered myself and quietly wrote down all my joys, sorrows, and contempt in my diary. So we've got a combination of things here. We've got, it looks like happy for joyful, sad for sorrow, and contempt might mean things that she is struggling with. Okay. We realize now that she's looking back on these entries that there's times that it was just passing. That's a great message for all of us too, that when we're feeling something in the moment, you know, that simple phrase, this too shall pass, emotions and feelings and all that are temporary. So when we're having those moments of sorrow and pain, you know, there are things that will change that with time. And so she's realizing that now she's done with some of those feelings. I could certainly just put a little thing on there that says, so side note or end note that says past and done with. I used to be, so now she's gone in past tense, she's reflecting on that. I used to be furious with Mommy, and still am sometimes. It's true that she doesn't understand me, but I don't understand her either. She did love me very much, and she was tender, but she landed in so many unpleasant situations through me and was nervous and irritable because of other worries and difficulties. It is certainly understandable that she snapped at me. I took it much too seriously, was offended, and was rude and aggravating to Mommy, which in turn made her unhappy. So it was really a matter of unpleasantness and misery rebounding all the time. It wasn't nice for either of us, but it is passing. So you see that I've repeatedly colored in the word understand or understandable or understanding, and it is all about understanding, and I even missed one here. It's all about understanding where someone else is coming from, and Anne's realizing that, and she is at such a young age to realize and mature that there are things going on the other side. And what happened in the situation is that they just kept rebounding that anger and that unpleasantry and the misery, but she's realizing it's not worth doing that back and forth. So I just didn't want to see all this and pitied myself very much, but that too is understandable. Those violent outbursts on paper were only giving vent to anger, which in a normal life could have been worked off by stamping my feet a couple times in a locked room or calling Mommy names behind her back. So she's realizing there were other outlets instead of, the back and forth bickering. Were these not necessarily the best way? Maybe not, a little bit of temper tantrums here, but she's realizing that she could have vented her anger in a different way, and that's insightful to her. The period when I caused Mommy to shed tears is over. I have grown wiser, and Mommy's nerves are not so much on edge. So that's in bold, just realizing how Anne has gone from this cold, distant mother, remember that's how we described her, to her relationship, to now realizing that we maybe can get along. She doesn't seem that she's necessarily loving her, which I'll share here, and I realize there's a typo, I apologize. I usually keep my mouth shut if I get annoyed, and so does she. So we appear to get on much better together. I can't really love Mommy in a dependent, childlike way. I just don't have that feeling. That's why I was explaining she doesn't really have that mother-daughter love bond, feeling nurtured, but realizing now that, there's a way, there's a different way instead of butting heads all the time. They appear to get along much better. I soothe my conscience now with that thought that it is better for hard words to be on paper than that Mummy should carry them in her heart. I love that line. Just take a moment, where she's saying she's soothing her conscience. So something that was bothering her, probably hurting her mother with some unkind words, it was getting the best of her. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe Mommy feels, like she's not a good mommy. So her realizing and saying, you know what, it's better if I vent through you when I'm upset, through the diary, than to actually share those words with her out loud. All right, moving on to the hot topic, I should say. This is where Anne is really faced with maturation as a young woman. She's coming into her womanhood. And Wednesday, the 5th of January, 1944, let's hear what she says. Dear Kitty, yesterday I read an article about blushing by Sis Hester. The article might have been addressed to me personally. Although I don't blush very easily, the other things in it certainly all fit me. She writes roughly something like this, that a girl in the years of puberty becomes quiet within and begins to think about the wonders that are happening to her body. And I have that in bold because that's really the message that she's sharing with us. She's saying, we kind of are trying to figure out what's happening hormonally. There are, changes within our body physically. It's not just girls and guys, but she happens to be a girl, so naturally reflecting on that. And if you remember, I'm thinking about a middle school health class when you were learning all of the changes and stuff that happen. And if you hadn't had a class like that, maybe, mom or dad has talked to you about it, but she doesn't really have the comfort there. So reading about it in an article and sharing her thoughts and expressing them in her diary is most comforting. I experienced that too, and that's why I get the feeling lately of being embarrassed about Margot, Mommy, and Daddy. Funnily enough, Margot, who is much more shy than I am, isn't at all embarrassed. I think what is happening to me is so wonderful, and not only what can be seen on my body, but all that is taking place inside. I never discuss myself or any of these things with anybody. That's why I have to talk to myself about them. So there she discloses that she's most comfortable sharing her thoughts right in the diary. And I also bolded there that she does think it's wonderful. Okay, the realization that she is changing and becoming a young lady. Apologies, had to clear my throat. So this overall, reflecting on this passage here, we see that the diary is really an outlet for her to share everything, that she has pent inside. So not just her relationship with her mother or the annex members, but even stuff that's going on within her, like internal conflict, things that she's dealing with, and especially the fact that she is maturing into a young woman. So along with that comes some interesting emotions. So we're going to read into this one a little bit more. Looking at the checkpoint, first of all, this is going to be your third question. What is Anne's relationship with Peter like at this point? So up until now, kind of keeping her distance, but here's where she's going to try and become a little more friendly, just because it almost sounds like she's out of desperation for a friend. So let's listen. Thursday, 6th of January, 1944. Dear Kitty, my longing to talk to someone became so intense that somehow or other I took it into my head to choose Peter. Peter has a mania for crossword puzzles at the moment and hardly does anything else. So I paused to look at my vocabulary word mania, a mania for crossword puzzles, and what the context was that he's hardly doing anything else. He must be like crazy about crossword puzzles. Mania. He just can't get enough of them. I helped him with them, and we soon sat opposite each other at his little table, he on the chair and me on the divan. It gave me a queer feeling each time I looked into his deep blue eyes, and he sat there with that mysterious laugh playing around his lips. I was able to read his inner thoughts. I could see on his face that look of helplessness and uncertainty how to behave, and at that time a trace of his sense of manhood. I noticed his shy manner, and it made me feel very gentle. I couldn't refrain from meeting those dark eyes again and again, and with my whole heart I almost beseeched him. "Oh, tell me what's going inside you. Oh, can't you look beyond this ridiculous chatter?" So, going back to beseeched, okay, she almost beseeched him. That's where then we get the extra information. So when we've got that right there, she's saying she almost beseeched him. They're sitting there, they're working on a crossword puzzle, and she's kind of actually analyzing him physically. So taking a better look at him physically, but also realizing that, you know, she wants to shout out to him. That's where beseech. She kind of wants to ask him. She wants to seek a little further into what's going on behind Peter's eyes. What's in that thought? What's in his mind? What are in his thoughts? So that's where when she's saying, "Oh, tell me what's going inside you," she doesn't actually yell that out, but she would like to. She'd like to ask him what he's thinking. Now, if we analyze this paragraph, she does spend some time, like I said, on his physical features. Okay, talking about his deep blue eyes and looking at them over and over again. And if you're not picking up on this, you'd have to do a little inversing. She's not saying she's having feelings for him or in love with him, but when she's just revealing that she's maturing and she's focusing on these physical features, we can infer that there's a little bit of, you know, I don't know, crushing going on. She doesn't quite realize what it is yet. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you're like, wow, why am I so focused on this? Oh, what's going on? And we'll see in the future what becomes. But here's a little bit more into that experience or encounter with Peter, where she's like, okay, boy, like, there's got to be more there than just this. He's very shy as well. But the evening passed and nothing happened except that I told him about blushing, naturally, not what I've written, but just so that he would become more sure of himself as he grew older. When I lay in bed and thought over the whole situation, I found it far from encouraging, and the idea that I should beg for Peter's patronage was simply repellent. So 2 vocabularies right there. One can do a lot to satisfy one's longings, which certainly sticks out in my case, for I have made up my mind to go and sit with Peter more often and to get him talking somehow or other. So her line here, when I lay in bed and thought over the whole situation, I found it far from encouraging. So the whole situation, let's go back. What did she want to do? She really just wanted someone to talk to. Okay, she was looking to actually have a person to talk to, not just share everything in her diary. And the idea that I should beg for Peter's patronage was simply repellent. The fact that it was kind of like a plea. She didn't want to have to do that. She didn't want to have to ask him to talk to her, to be friends with her. It was repellent. It was repelling her. And if you ever hear of repellent, I think that should be a term you might be familiar with, like bug spray is bug repellent. It sounds like it's something you want to get rid of, right? So she's almost dismissing the idea, but then she decides, you know what, I'm going to try and continue spending more time with him because I desire so much to have a friend, to have someone to talk to. And here she reveals, whatever you do, don't think I'm in love with him. Not a bit of it. If the Van Dams had a daughter instead of a son, I should have tried to make friends with her too. So she does make it clear then that there's not a love interest, but yet, you know, we saw her analyzing those physical features, which are interesting. All right, moving forward, she's reflecting on a time with her family where she honestly felt a little bit like an orphan here. So if you look at the bottom, it says feeling like an outsider in her own family. So where we just left off with the Peter situation, again, I just want to emphasize her style, that she is sometimes in the moment, and then she's sometimes in the past, something that happened in the past that she's remembering that she wants to clear up or kind of talk through with her diary. So Wednesday, 12 January 1944, Dear Kitty, I have an odd way of sometimes, as it were, being able to see myself through someone else's eyes. Then I view the affairs of a certain Anne at my ease and browse through the pages of her life as if she were a stranger. Before we came here, when I didn't think about things as much as I do now, I used to two at a time, sorry, I must have typed there, have the feeling that I didn't belong to Mansa, Pim, and Margot, and that I would always be a bit of an outsider. Sometimes I used to pretend I was an orphan until I reproached and punished myself, telling myself it was all my own fault that I played this self-pitying role, when I was really so fortunate. Then came morning. As soon as someone came downstairs, I hoped that it would be Mummy, who would say good morning to me. I greeted her warmly because I really longed for her to look lovingly at me. Then she made some remark or other that seemed unfriendly, and I would go off for school, again feeling thoroughly disheartened. On the way home, I would make excuses for her because she had so many worries. Arrive home cheerful, chatter 19 to the dozen until I began repeating myself, and left the room wearing a pensive expression, my satchel under my arm. Sometimes I decided to remain cross, but when I came home from school I always had so much news that my resolutions were gone with the wind, and Mummy, whatever she might be doing, had to lend an ear to all my adventures. Then the time came once more when I didn't listen for footsteps on the staircase any longer, and at night my pillow was wet with tears. So this is kind of sad for me to think about Anne, where she's at now, in the diary, of course. But feeling that way even before they moved, feeling kind of alone and not part of her family. And she does quickly return to her mother here. So like at the beginning of this passage where she starts talking about it being a whole entire family situation where she almost feels like a stranger to her family, she talks about feeling a stranger. She felt like she was almost an orphan, and then she decided to reproach. So sorry, I didn't pause there for that vocabulary word. Let's look at that. Sometimes I used to pretend I was an orphan until I reproached and punished myself, telling myself it was all my own fault that I played the self-pitying role. So it's kind of like taking it back. She used to do one thing and then she's taking it back because realizing it wasn't helping at all, maybe making things worse. But she has this reoccurring situation with her mom where all she really wants is the attention, the loving feeling and emotion from her mom. And I try and connect this, outside of the diary, of course, trying to make relevance. And I know that there's people that don't feel that connection with somebody, that their strongest desire is to feel that either from a parent or a loved one, and it's just not there. So I feel like Anne's mom kind of that's just her personality. It's a little bit cold and standoffish, and Anne's just waiting for that moment. So she repeats the same kind of things over and over again, and her personality is, she gets real excited as she's coming home from school. She wants her mom to listen and embrace all of those moments, but her mom ends up just saying something rude. And then it bothers her and she goes upstairs and she might cry herself to sleep. So reflecting on how she's feeling from a past situation is tough as well. Okay, and we're getting into the 28th of January. We're looking at our checkpoint first of all. This is your fourth question here. This is, what is the risk that the helpers are taking when visiting with the annex residents? This is a kind of a, I'm sorry, the part of the diary when we're seeing the impact of the outside events, the Holocaust, what's happening outside of the annex. Even though the event is within the annex because they're in hiding, but all those things outside. So we end up kind of looking at a very positive spin here. The people that actually help, the people that are trying to, secure others' safeties at the risk of their own. So let's hear what she says. Friday, 28th January, 1944. Dear Kitty, one favorite subject of Kufis and Hanks is that of people in hiding and in the underground movement. They know very well that anything to do with other people in hiding interests us tremendously, and how deeply we can sympathize with the sufferings of people who get taken away, and rejoice with the liberated prisoner. So it's really just bringing in other situations and scenarios that are much like what's going on in that annex. Okay, apologies. It's a lot to read. I have to wet my whistle. So, liberated prisoner. We rejoice with the liberated prisoner. Our vocabulary word here is to feel good about someone that has been freed. So like from the word liberty, a prisoner that has been freed is definitely a moment to rejoice. And we're talking about not a prisoner that is guilty of something, a crime, but a prisoner that of war that was taken. A prisoner of war, oh my goodness. A prisoner that was taken wrongly, like into the concentration camps. Okay, so we are quite used to the idea of going into hiding or underground as in bygone days. One was used to daddy's bedroom slippers warming in the front of the fire. And here she just, if you're looking at the word bygone, bygone would be something of the past. And in this case, it would be something very common. You know, daddy's slippers used to just be warming in front of the fire. That was nothing out of the ordinary. But here now we have, you know, it's kind of as common right now as the people that are going into hiding or going underground. It's just a common practice at the moment. Okay, there are a great number of organizations such as the Free Netherlands, which forge identity cards, supply money to people, and work for young men in hiding. And it's amazing how much noble, unselfish work these people are doing, risking their own lives to help and save others. Our helpers are a very good example. They have pulled us through up until now, and we hope they will bring us safely to dry land. Otherwise, they will have to share the same fate as the many others who are being searched for. Never have we heard one word of the burden which we certainly must be to them. Never has one of them complained of the trouble we give. So right there explaining that there's so many people trying to help and that they have this group of helpers as an example who come and share things with them, and they never complain about it. You know, they never say you're a burden. They're just doing it out of the kindness of their hearts, taking that risk. That right here, they're risking their own lives. Okay, because if they do get caught, the people in hiding or the helpers, they're going to end up in the same situation, right? The same fate. Now we know that the helpers aren't actually in hiding. They're not, you know, Jewish faith. They're not at risk right now for being called to concentration camps or anything. But if they do get caught helping, they end up in the same boat. So she's sharing a little bit about what they do here. They all come upstairs every day, talk to the men about business and politics, to the women about food and wartime difficulties, and about newspapers and books with the children. They put on the brightest possible faces, bring flowers and presents for birthdays and bank holidays, are always ready to help and do it all they can. That is something we must never forget. Although others may show heroism in the war or against the Germans, our helpers display heroism in their cheerfulness and affection. So at this time that she's reflecting on one of the topics, she's also giving recognition to the people that are there risking their lives to help them. And then our last passage here kind of runs on to two sections, or two slides. Excuse me, this is when there's a lot of talk of what's going on again outside and what the potential dangers are to everybody in the annex. So it's kind of, you know, looking at it as like killing time through conversation, but also, you know, the kind of reality that what if this is happening? What do we do? How will we prep? What will we plan for? And then we'll look at that atmosphere question again. Excuse me. Thursday, the 3rd of February, 1944. Dear Kitty, invasion fever in the country is mounting daily. If you were here, on the one hand, you would probably feel the effect of all these preparations just as I do. And on the other hand, you would laugh at us for making such a fuss. Who knows? Perhaps for nothing. So right there, she's realizing that we could be working ourselves up for no reason. Okay, making all these preparations. And this I'm going to pull out as a relevant piece too, because this happens in real life a lot. I mean, think about a time where maybe you thought something was going to happen, you made all these plans and preparations, and then it didn't. You know, I think of sometimes when we hear about the snow and the storms that are coming. And yes, sometimes we're glad we prepped because we needed to, but there are times I think some people go crazy and then nothing happens. So sometimes it can feel like a joke, but here she's kind of just giving the facts. All the newspapers are full of the invasion and are driving people mad by saying that in the event of the English landing in Holland, the Germans will do all they can to defend the country. If necessary, they will resort to flooding. And for me, I'm reading this, scratching my head. Flooding? They're going to flood the country? Like, what? With this, maps have been published on which the parts of Holland that will be underwater are marked. As this applies to large parts of Amsterdam, the first question was, what shall we do if the water in the streets rises to 1 meter? The answers given by different people vary considerably. So she actually starts to share here numbers of the annex and what they might be saying as possible solutions to this problem of being underwater. As walking or cycling is out of the question, we shall have to wade through the stagnant water. Okay, sounds pretty logical. Of course not. One will have to try and swim. We shall all put on our bathing suits and caps and swim underwater as much as possible. Then no one will see that we are Jews. Okay, didn't mean to laugh there, but really, prepping with your, bathing suit and caps so that you can swim, to escape that, at that point, it is a little funny, but it's not, because maybe there's a chance of getting out and escaping that way. Maybe a disaster would help. I mean, like a natural disaster, but this one is kind of controlled if they're going to purposely flood Amsterdam. Oh, what nonsense. I'd like to see the ladies swimming. If the rats started biting their legs, that was naturally a man. Just see who screams the loudest. And that's just, adding a little bit of humor there, where if that's a solution to go swimming to safety, it's not like it's a swimming pool or clean water. It's going to be, a lot of infestation. So it probably won't be very pleasant to go and wear your swimsuit to try and escape. There might be rats. And then continuing on here is someone else saying, we shan't be able to get out of the house anyway. The warehouse will definitely collapse if there is a flood. It's so wobbly already. Well, we might not even make it up because of the condition. Listen, folks, all joking apart, we shall try and get a boat. Okay, somebody wants to try and find a boat. Why bother? I know something much better. We each get a hold of a wooden packing case from the attic and row with a soup ladle. Okay. So, what are the chances you're going to just find a boat out there? So now we're saying, well, here, let's use our resources that are in the attic. Okay, so anything that is a wooden would probably float, and we'll kind of get a hold of those, and then we'll use soup ladles. So, honestly, this one sounds a little bit more logical here if they have to paddle out. Here we go. I shall walk on stilts. I used to be an expert at it in my youth. Really? Where are you getting those stilts? Henry Van Staten won't need to. He's sure to take his wife on his back. Then she'll be on stilts. And it's just a little bit of lighthearted humor here, saying that obviously this man is tall enough that he would be able to take his wife out on his back. This gives you a rough idea, doesn't it, Kit? So she's giving some of the discussion and conversation that she hears. And again, like this section of all of them kind of puts a little bit of a smile on my face, just realizing, that it's a little bit lighthearted, but yet it can also get serious if they, were to have to do this. But here she goes, I will spare you further examples of these conversations. I myself keep very quiet and don't care much whether I live or die. That line I don't really feel comfortable with. At that point, Anne seems to just be in a state of despair, right? But if I look a little bit more and analyze her character as to where she is, it's actually she's just kind of being a realist. She's realizing that the situation and circumstances are what they are. And the world will still keep turning without me. What is going to happen will happen. And anyway, it's no good trying to resist. I trust to luck and nothing but work, hoping that it will all end well. Yours, Anne. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of insight as to what's been going on in this section. So I'm going to come back to the atmosphere question now. So this, what word best describes the atmosphere in the annex? And you'll see a selection of words that will be very clear which one best describes what's going on. You got to think about the morale based on what's happening outside. You know, Anne and her mood as she is maturing, trying to find a friend, and Peter, and so forth. So make sure you are completing that checkpoint for today. And I wish you the best as you continue reading. Thank you for listening.